important trading partner to Kenya. As we heard this morning, one of our largest exports markets for Kenya is the European Union, and if you look at the trade statistics between the two regions over the last 10, 11 years, the trade imbalance has been largely in favor of the EU. And if I share some of these numbers, it'll be quite startling to us to see that on average, since the year 2011, the trade imbalance was in favor of Europe, 437 million euro, and it grew steadily. And as at 2021, the trade imbalance had almost doubled. It's now 822 million euro, and that's in favor of imports from Europe. And as important a market as it is for Kenya, we still continue to maintain a very large trade deficit between the two countries. I have a very important and very honored to have such a great, distinguished panel here with me, and we will be discussing about how we can bridge the divide. We'll be discussing on how we can improve the trade environment. We'll be discussing on how we can foster more trade between the two, European Union and Kenya. But what I would like to do is, before we start, is I would like the panelists to introduce themselves, and then we can take questions from there on. And I'll start with my immediate left, Mr. Kidenda, who is actually stepping in for the PS of investment. He had to rush out for an urgent meeting, and he's graciously left Mr. Kidenda behind. So over to you, 2 minutes each, if you could introduce yourselves, and then we can go on to the session. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Jez. Good morning to you all. As Jez has indicated, my name is Fano Kidenda. I work as a director within the State Department of Investment Promotion. I also head an organization known as the Kenya National Multi-Commodity Exchange, which is under the State Department of Trade. The State Department of Investment Promotion was recently established in January, pursuant to an executive order, and it grew out of the growing realization that some of the investment promotion activities within the country, both in government as well as in private sector, are uncoordinated. So our work is basically to attract private sector investments into the country, grow and retain those investments, and then we also deal with issues around business climate to tackle some of the bottlenecks that investors face in terms of their competitiveness on a global scale. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Martin Eshwani from Ministry of Transport, standing in for PS Transport. From the State Department of Transport and the Ministry as a whole, we have quite a number of areas that can be considered for investment. And some of these areas are the ones we wish to share with the potential investors. First, for example, I would like to highlight a number of potential areas that are ready for investment. For example, I will highlight in 4 areas that we are going to look at, mainly touching on the 4 modes of transport. First of all, there is the area of aviation, and under aviation we have, I'm going to distinguish that per airstrip or airport. At the Jomo Kenyatta Airport, we have opportunities for investment in multi-story parking facilities and also commercially viable important persons terminal. At Wilson Airport, we are proposing that there is possible investment in the area of passenger terminal building, multi-story car parking, and business park. At Isiolo Airport, this one we are considering it as one that can be concession to the private sector. Under maritime, we have construction of Dongokundu Special Economic Zone, which I believe can interest quite a number of investors from the European Union. We also have construction of warehouse and cargo handling facilities. In addition to that, we have a construction of berth at Lamu Port. Under the railway transport, we have regeneration of part of the city, which we are calling the railway city. This is a facility that will have quite a number of services that are provided. One of them being conference facilities, car park facilities, and then development of affordable housing, as it was mentioned in the morning. This provides a huge opportunity because it's actually extending the CBD and regenerating some of the sector that is occupied by houses or buildings that were built, some of them close to a century. So we are renewing the area of that railway transport. Then another area that will be of interest is under road transport. Under road transport, we are talking about the need to develop multi-story parking facilities. Many people in this city spend a lot of time looking for parking spaces. And with availability of multi-story parking spaces, this will address the challenge of on-street parking, as well as taking too long to get a space. This is a very, very viable area to look at. We are also considering area of motor vehicle inspection. Currently, we have over 3 million vehicles in the country. Out of this, only a small section is subjected to annual inspection. This one is mainly due to the fact that the government has 17 motor vehicle inspection centers distributed in various parts of the country. And we have already made a law which requires that all vehicles which are older than 4 years be subjected to inspection. And given that in Kenya we have about 90% of vehicles imported being second-hand, they basically qualify from day one of arrival. So that means that there is a huge business potential in this particular area of private sector being engaged in motor vehicle inspection. Another area is the area of e-mobility. We are moving towards green transport. As it was pointed out earlier on, Kenya as a country has had numerous challenges arising from climate change. And people as a country which has already signed the Paris Agreement and committed to reduce emissions by 32% come 2030, we have a responsibility to reduce emissions in the transport sector. So moving towards e-mobility is one of the strategies that we have identified as addressing emissions in our country. So it's one of the areas we wish to promote as a potential area for investment. We have done well in the sense that we have developed standards ready for takeoff.
Thank you very much. Just a quick round of introduction, maybe Carol Kariuki, and then we can go to the Q&A session. I think, thank you very much.
Carol Kariuki, CEO of Kenya Private Sector Alliance, and for the purposes of this meeting, our biggest role here today is to really ensure that we can grow investments between Kenya and the EU. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm Helena Koenig. I'm the Deputy Secretary General for the European External Action Service, which is the European Union's diplomatic and foreign affairs department. And we are, of course, involved in the whole relationship between the EU and Kenya, between the people of the European Union and Kenya, and of course also the business-to-business relationship. And that's, of course, why I'm here today at this conference. Our role is really to make sure that we have, on the European level, the policies that support more interaction. We already have a flourishing business environment between the EU and Kenya. The instrument that we have at the EU disposals are used to support this also, and not the least, making sure that we have a very close contact with our EU member states, so also all of EU member states' instruments are used to support the development of our partnership. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The last introduction.
Thank you very much. My name is Dora Correa. I am a director in DG Trade in the European Commission, particularly responsible for trade and investment relations with Africa, and today for Kenya more particularly. I am actually the one Honorable C.S. Kuria threatened to confiscate the passport from if we don't deliver on the economic partnership agreement by the end of the week. So I hope I have your sympathy for this task ahead. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And we hope you get your passport back soon. But just diving into this discussion of fostering EU-Kenya business relations and taking it to the new level, I think we will open it up to the floor as well so that we can ask these questions to this distinguished panel. But I'd like to start with Ranil Kadenda, who's on my left, who is sitting in here for the PS in charge of investments. It might be a slightly difficult question, but I think the audience would like to hear difficult questions and get difficult answers that come to you. And the question is, and this came to me from the audience, investors are increasingly concerned about the ease of doing business and increasing costs. Which reform initiatives has the government prioritized to improve the business and investment climate? A bit fully loaded, but as much as you can try. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Jazz. So over the years, the government of Kenya has certainly recognized the importance of addressing bottlenecks in the investment environment as well as the business environment to be able to then address issues of competitiveness for the private sector. So since the year 2014, the government embarked on an ambitious program to improve the country's rankings under the World Bank run Ease of Doing Business program. So quite a number of reforms were carried out, and I'm happy to say that by the year 2021, when the last rankings were provided, the country had actually improved 80 positions from 136th position to 56th by that year. And it's also important to note that in quite a number of areas, the country came out tops in terms of rankings, in terms of the reforms that were carried out. But more specifically to the reforms that government has been carrying out. So part of our reforms are focused on basically just looking at the business life cycle. So from when you set up a business, how exactly is that experience for you as an investor? We've worked with development partners to improve on the business registration services. There is a unified company registration platform that basically enables you to get all your statutory registrations at once in an automated process, reducing the amount of time you need to take and the cost to be able to go to different offices. In terms of tax processes, what we've done is we've developed a single window through which we have unified payroll taxes. So every month when you need to pay your income tax for the individual as well as the Social Security and Hospital Insurance Fund, we are rolling out a unified platform to ensure that that is done at once. So that will further reduce bureaucracy in that area. We've worked with the judiciary to establish small claims courts. Over 15 such locations have already been identified and gazetted across the country, and adjudicators are now dealing with cases in those areas. The experience has been good. In the first year, well over 6,000 cases were dispensed, reducing the backlog significantly, and well over 1 billion shillings worth of money that was locked up in judicial proceedings was released for businesses to be able to operationalize with. Other areas of reform include working on basically just logistics. We've simplified processes, eliminated some in certain cases. We are also working with county governments to basically address inter-county trade. There have been concerns raised by the private sector about the multiplicity of different government organizations involved in regulation as well as the licensing of trade. So we have a work stream on that. We intend to ensure that when you get a single business license, it is effectively a single business license. And also to ensure that there's predictability across the country as you scale your business. We've also worked in the area of tax. Currently, there's already a draft tax policy, national tax policy, that has been developed, and it's gone through public participation. It should be passed in the next couple of months. It will create better predictability for businesses in terms of being able to plan what kind of taxes they need to pay over time. So those are just a few of the reforms that have been carried out. I'll be happy to give more details later.
Thank you very much, Fanuel. Next question to Director of Roads and Rail, Martin Eswani. You did a great presentation in chalking out the Ministry of Transport's vision on how they want to go forward. And there's a point you touched on e-mobility and e-mobility possibilities in Kenya. I'm sure the audience here and the way Europe and US is going into this whole new trajectory of moving away from fossil fuels and going into electric vehicles, and we heard the President talked about green revolution or green production or clean energy. The question is that countries around the world are shifting to electric mobility as part of a strategy of reducing emissions and addressing climate change. That's exactly what the President also talked about this morning. So the question is, what investment opportunities are available in Kenya in that e-mobility sector?
Thank you very much for that question about e-mobility. As a country, I had pointed out earlier that we are promoting e-mobility as a strategy to reduce emission. And what we are doing now is to ensure that we have regulations in place as well as policy. Those ones we are working on them. But what we have already finalized is developed standards for electric motor vehicles and motorcycles in this country. We are therefore promoting e-mobility through addressing a number of tax incentives. We have already achieved one by reducing excess duty on 100% electric motor vehicles from 20 to 10%. We are considering other options on how to make electric vehicles and motorcycles affordable to the people who are interested in buying them. In addition to that, we are finalizing on standards for charging infrastructure for EVs. And apart from that, we are also addressing issues that concern capacity. Because when we promote e-mobility, many questions arise. For example, this new technology. In the event of mechanical or technical problems with these vehicles, what happens? Do we have technicians in place to repair and maintain these vehicles. So we have worked closely with the NITA to develop a framework of training, and they have benefited from a capacity building in South Korea, and currently we have about 100 technicians being trained. In addition to that, we have other organizations that are interested in helping us build the capacity of TVETs to be able to train artisans who can repair and maintain these vehicles. So we are looking at areas of physical incentives as well as policy to give overall guideline on how the country can move towards green transport. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Carol, a simpler question to you, but yet very deep. Question is, how can the Kenyan private sector and the European Union foster greater partnerships and leverage on the new opportunities?
Thank you very much. I think the opportunities lie with what happened with COVID. I think COVID taught us that countries have to relook at their investments in a very different way. So two things that come to mind first is that I think we all woke up one day and we realized we have one factory called China. And so when China closed down, most countries really struggled with the supply, with the value chains. And so it's an important time right now for Kenya business and the European businesses to look at that and start saying how can we draw some of the opportunities in terms of investments, in terms of materials that we are all facing in one direction, in the Asian direction, and start doing them here in Kenya and in the European Union. So that was one of them. The second thing that COVID unleashed was digitization. So now you can do a lot more business digitally without having to travel. And so again, this is where the opportunities lie, and especially for our young people as they think about digital jobs, that they can do digital jobs and digitally enabled jobs without traveling. And that will reduce even the issues we have of immigration and that we've seen, and especially North Africa and the EU. So again, new jobs and new areas. The third area is that, and that was alluded by the President this morning, was the issue of green economy. And as we see what's happening with the climate change, and many times when we talk to businesses and you try to get them to adopt to green businesses, to green economy, they see costs instead of opportunities. And actually there are more opportunities if we turn green than when we remain the way we are. And I'll give a good example. It's circular economy. Everything that we use, anything that we make can actually be reused, including food. Many times peels, even banana peels, shouldn't be thrown away. They are actually food, and we can turn them to food. So turning to circular economy presents many more opportunities for both businesses here in Kenya and in the European Union as we look green and as we move to the green economy and circular economy. So those are three great areas that we can work together and start looking at them using digital, moving some of the investments into the region that are now leaving the other continents, but also for Africa. I think for the European Union is to say, Africa is the remaining continent. We're always saying we're the last continent, and the opportunities are mega. And I will not reiterate what the President said, from the population to greenery to food security and all that. And because we've had a long-term relationship, including our infrastructure and how infrastructure looks and works, and we are closer continents than with any other, then the opportunities are immense. And so for me, that's where I'd be looking at the new opportunities that COVID did bring to us, but also looking back and saying, because of our long-term relationship that we've had between the two continents, between the country and the union, and now as we're going into ACFTA, that we look at the new opportunities that are coming up with the circular economy, with the green economy, and the population in Africa.
Thank you, Carol. This question for Helena. The African continent is 54 African countries. A lot of them are least developed countries, and very few of them are developing countries. In our own regional economic bloc, the East African Community, Kenya is the only developing country. and the rest are least developed countries. On one hand, we're looking at creating a huge market opportunity for everybody who invests in the continent under the Continental Free Trade Agreement. We're looking at 1.4 billion people. We're looking at $3.5 trillion economy size. And by 2050, we're looking at 1 in 4 people in the world are going to be African. So serious opportunity that lies ahead of us. But at the same time, when it comes to doing trade with the European Union, we are being divided rather than being united with market access. For example, in Kenya, a couple of years ago, Kenyan floriculture sector had to pay duty because we hadn't appended our signature on the EPA. And if we sign on the EPA, then we're straining up a relationship with the partner states of East African Community, because it should be a community signing with the European Union as opposed to be a country signing. So I'd just like to hear your thoughts on, are we really moving together in a united manner to move Africa forward, or are we going to be having bilateral agreements or multilateral agreements? Because those are the real issues that are really affecting the exporters in this room. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and an excellent question. We've heard this morning in the presentations, of course, the importance of signing or initialing the final EPA between Kenya and the European Union. And I think it's absolutely fair to say that this is something we should actually be seen as a building block for making sure that we actually have the regional EPA and regional trade developing a lot more. It is in Kenya's interest to have the regional trade and relationship flourishing, and it's also in our interest. And a lot of what we are doing, in addition to rules, etc., that come with the EPA, we should give advantages to investments coming into Kenya. What we're also doing is try to support with other policies and other instruments, as I mentioned in the beginning. So with any new agreement, you see a boost to the overall relationship. And in the case of Kenya, I think it also gives Kenya a chance to be the first mover in this region, particularly on issues like climate and green, but also first mover in getting your EAC partners coming on board on the trade agreement and really reaping the benefit from a regional perspective. In addition, we are supporting other policies. It was earlier mentioned the priorities of the government. Of course, when you have a project, whether it's on infrastructure or whether it's a new factory that comes in as an investment, it's very often that you need support, for example, in training. It may be a road which is needed. So one thing we are trying to do with our Global Gateway investment program is to make sure that we look at it in a more holistic way. We work together very closely with our member states so we can build a package which all should benefit you business, making business, but also Kenya, both as a bilateral country, but also for the region as a whole.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Dora, another slightly technical question for you. I know the African ministers in a WTO meeting in Hong Kong in 2005 actually asked for all LDC countries should be duty-free to get market access to the Western world, and Europe consented that. I think the African ministers probably thought there was only an African LDC and not an Asian LDC, and they obviously lost out. And we've seen what that one legislative move has done with Bangladesh. And Bangladesh today is the single largest exporter of apparel to the European Union, with 70% of their business, which is almost more than $33 billion, coming to Europe. But Bangladesh has since graduated. It's no longer least developed country. And they graduated 2 years ago. And they continue to enjoy duty-free market access. Do you see that being in sync with the trade agreement that was signed at the WTO? Why would they still be allowed duty-free market access when they've already graduated out of that status? Thank you.
Thank you very much. It is seemingly a technical question, but in fact it's a very political one. and it's about how we actually stage the preferences we give to our partners in accessing our market. Of course, the question you ask about LDCs and what we call everything but arms access to the EU market is a very relevant one, in particular in the context we are now going through and which Carol was mentioning since the pandemic and since the war in Ukraine, which has very much challenged established supply chains and established ways of working. The EU is, of course, very generous in its offer to LDCs and will continue to do so, but the EU is also accompanying these countries as they graduate and they move up the value chains and move up the development ladder, I would say. It is important for us, of course, to have a framework that puts these relations into a stable and predictable rule-based system, and we very much continue to defend the WTO multilateral system in this regard. Of course, then, and also building on your question and Helene's reply, of course, then the EU also establishes preferential partnerships, either bilaterally or regional, through free trade agreements or economic partnership agreements. And this is for us really how trade can better support the development efforts of our partners. And if you allow me, let me say a word on the economic partnership agreement. We are very much looking forward to conclude with Kenya, because as we heard from President Ruto before this morning, the trade and investment relation between Kenya and the EU is a pivotal one. We are Kenya's leading destination for its exports. We believe that there's potential to do much more, and this is why we are so keen to have this agreement established between Kenya and the EU. And I will just mention very briefly 3 points where we think this agreement will make a difference. You were talking about the access to EU market for least developed countries. Of course, EU market is 450 million consumers. It's a very strong leverage that we have, and it's a very strong opportunity. What we see is that for the countries and regions we have agreements with, economic partnership agreements with in Africa, trade with the EU has grown by 80% in the last 10 years. The countries with whom we do not have agreements, that growth was 40%. So having an EPA actually doubles the trade relation between the EU and a country or a region. And this is extremely important, of course, and it's demonstrated empirically. It also has other benefits that indirectly foster the development of our partners' economies, because of course it means also that imported inputs like machinery or equipment are also cheaper, basically. So we really see our agreements as helping African countries move up the value chain ladder, and this is why I think CS Korea was talking about not incentivizing poverty by keeping LDCs in a sort of a stagnant position. What we see is that the argument of joining EPAs goes beyond the market access towards a real development of the economies. Let me just give you a very quick illustration. Since we have our EPA with Southern Africa community, we have observed that for example, Southern African exports of cars to the EU have grown 22% in 5 years. This clearly means that the EPA is supporting the development of manufacturing industries as well. And this is because, and this is my second point, of course, having a stable, predictable, legal certain framework helps inform investment decisions. And when investors are deciding on where to locate their investment, where to source from, having this stability, having this predictability helps. So in the end, the agreement also attracts foreign investment to the countries, and this is also empirically proven. And my third point, because I don't want to take too much of your time, it goes back to what President Ruto was saying this morning about green growth and the opportunities it creates. We very much believe in the EU that trade is fundamental to underpin sustainability, to underpin green growth. The digital and the green transitions need trade to take place, and the green growth actually helps our value chains become more diversified and more resilient, and this goes back to Carol's point as well on the aftermath of the pandemic. I mean, just to give you an example, trade in green technologies like renewable energies, for example, create jobs and makes green goods more competitive, and it spurs innovation. So here the first mover advantage that Helena was mentioning is really capital. For the EU, sustainability also has, of course, a social dimension, and we very much foster corporate social responsibility and corporate governance. But let me just say that this is also a business opportunity in itself, because the European consumer is increasingly willing to pay a premium for social corporate responsibility. So again, it creates further opportunities. I stop here because I don't want to take too much time. I'm very much willing and able to put all our efforts into the talks on the agreement between the EU and Kenya this week, let alone to get my passport back, but also because I do believe this is one of these gateways that would unblock the trade and investment relations. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And before I open it up to the floor, just one burning question, and I think maybe correct for this audience as well. And like I said earlier on, 25% of the world's population by 2050 is going to be African. So 1 in 4 people walking on the planet are going to be African. We have a young population. The average maiden age on the continent is 19 years. We have huge demand for investment and job creation, and we need to maintain that social peace that you talked about. We have a serious opportunity in front of us to either create the world's biggest productive society with this youth, or if we turn a blind eye, and this is all of us included, everybody in this room, it's a global responsibility and not African responsibility, is if we don't manage that society to become a productive society, it can very quickly turn into a destructive society. And once they turn into a destructive society, you'll start seeing, and you're already seeing in Europe, with the migration, especially from North Africa, people looking for greener pastures, a lot of people on the boat every day on the Mediterranean Sea. And I think the conscious thing to do is to create jobs on the continent so that we can manage this migration. What is your view, both of you, Helena and Dora, on how can we create jobs on the continent? Because otherwise, you have a bigger problem than we do. I'm sorry.
Thank you. And I think on migration, but it's actually a lot wider than migration as such. And I think your point of, let's turn it around, going from a destructive society when it comes to climate to a productive society which is sustainable is one of the key aspects of this. It's clear that we in Europe want to see Africa develop. It is good for you and it's good for us, and I don't think it's only because of migration pressure, but it's actually good for our whole economy, it's good for the environment, it's good for climate. So all of that, I think, we are trying to, I think all of us, not only Europe, but others are trying to get our act together, if I'm saying it that way. We all know that what is needed to do the transformation, both green and digital, you need enormous amount of funds, more funds than you can tap from individual countries' coffers, let's put it that way. So we really need a new partnership between countries, between the financial institutions. We had some signing of projects from the European investment banks. You know, we have heard this morning how closely we work in the Team Europe effort together with our member states. We need to make sure, above all, that the money that is embedded in the private sector also work for that good, the good transformation. It's not only Africa, but for us, Europe, I think Africa is crucial, as you mentioned. So I think by working together, by making sure that we become more efficient, that we join our strategies and try to get all actors joining in on where we want to reach. I think that's what we're going to have to do. And part of that is also, of course, the change of going from the development partnership to a real political partnership also. I think looking at our African partners, and you will have seen in the latest discussions we have between European Union and African leaders, that we want to cement this partnership and do it together. So it's growing, helping Africa grow and develop together with Europe. I think it's the only way we can tackle all of these issues on a global level.
Thank you very much. I would now like to open it up to the audience for questions. We have 20 minutes. One question there. Can the mic going around? Can you speak loud enough? Question? Can we have the mic there, please? The far corner. Question to any panelist. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much, panelists, for the brilliant presentations. I really learned a lot, in fact. And I should start with my introduction. My name is Diana. I'm a student, and also I'm interning at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So this is a direct question to all the panelists, because I believe for the many youth that are here that will not be able to ask these questions, I should be the gateway as well to ask this for them. The EU has been a big part of Kenya, and I think I'll quote the EU-Kenya Partnership Blue Book for 2021. And in this, we had the Green Deal and digitalization as the key mutual interest between Kenya and the EU. Considering the fact that we're talking about opportunities and partnerships, I'd love for the panel to highlight to us exactly how the youth can participate and be a part of such a transformation in order not only to bring a global gateway through Kenya, but also to sustain Kenya itself and the youth that are here towards green deals and the digitalization of all our equipments, especially here in Kenya. My second question is in regards to, and I think I'll use the case study of Kiambu Institute of Science, whereby it just joined the network for centers of excellence. And these are one of the key amendments that the EU has been pushing. Is the education sector also a part of the partnership and opportunities that can be put across in order not only to participate in the growth for the youth, but also to instructuralize the structures that could be able to grow the youth through education? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Can we have two more questions and then we can open this? I saw one question here in the middle. Can we have the mic here in the middle? And one there. So after these three, we can have a response session from the panelists. Thank you.
Yes, actually, Maren Diale from the German Chamber and the European Business Council. My question goes to the Ministry of Trade. We heard a lot of positive things about Kenya. We are all here to promote it. One thing that is presently very much concerning the business community, local and international, is the export service tax. And maybe the ministry can say something to that, whether there's hope, whether that has ever been lifted again. Thank you.
Thank you. One more question there and then we can have the panel to answer.
Thank you. I'm Joseph Oliech from the WE Center. And my question to the panelists, and to be specific to the EU team, we have a lot of global attention to renewable energy and green intervention. And we also have a lot of focus on the EV sector. In the past, when you look at the electronic industry, we have had a lot of electronic devices coming from developed countries to developing countries. A case in point, what we have is the CRT screens. CRT screens, that is a big problem to most African countries. And even in Europe, we do not have facilities recycling them. And as at now, we have a stockpile, huge stockpile of such units in Africa and in Kenya. And according to the Global Monitor, Kenya generates close to 51.3 metric tons of e-waste every year. When we get to the green economy, the intervention to green solution, do we have structures or mechanisms by the European Union to support the African countries and also to support Kenya in particular on how to manage the end life of the products and the units that are developed in the green solution program? For example, we have the batteries that are used in the EV sector. We also have the PV panels that are used in the solar energy, and also a number of batteries that are used. These batteries, they have shelf life. These batteries, at some point, they will be dead, and most of them are toxic. We do not have technical expertise in most African countries to handle this. And we also do not have enough infrastructure for this to be handled. We have small startups here and there struggling to come up with local solutions. And I was just trying to ask and check if this is an area of focus. Could this be an area of focus for EU to see that in as much as we will be supporting the developing countries and African countries to adopt the green technology and also use renewable energy, are we also focusing on end-life management of some of these units and the devices that we produce? A different question to a different sector. We have been told that there are opportunities in the motor vehicle inspection industry. And Kenya's age limit, vehicles coming to this country should be less than 8 years old. And of course, there are plans to reduce that. Are we having plans to cap the age limit for those vehicles that have stayed? Because we all say that the vehicles coming to the country should be not more than 8 years. But now, once you import that vehicle or you manufacture it locally, that vehicle would be allowed to be on the roads for close to 30, 40 years. So are there mechanisms to look at the other end of this as well? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think the only direct question was to the PS Trade, but the PS Trade is not here. We have a PS investment being represented here, the PS Trade. Maybe do you want to attempt this question?
Yeah. Thank you, Jez. So do I respond to only that particular one, or no, I can pick?
You can respond to all, but that one in particular is for you. The rest the panel will handle as well.
Okay, thanks. So the good lady from the German Business Association raised the issue of export services tax. It's an issue that has been brought to our attention at the ministry, and there's actually a work stream that we've started to see how we can remedy that situation. So you can rest assured that you will be seeing some interventions before June, before our budget cycle. The specific issues around that are as regards to whether you can actually claim VAT, you input VAT, on the basis of whether you're tax exempt or whether you're zero rated in terms of your operations. The proposal on the table right now is to exempt so that the issue of VAT refunds does not come into play. As it is right now, if you're in business process outsourcing, it's zero rated, so you can actually claim your VAT. But for all the other export services, they are VATable. That's the situation right now, but we intend to remedy that by June. So then I'll touch a bit on the question that was asked by the good lady, Diana. I think you asked about how the youth can actually benefit from the EU-Kenya trade. A couple of areas that you may want to look into. I think increasingly due to globalization, a lot of the trade is actually migrating into e-commerce. So the youth can actually take advantage of that in terms of establishing e-commerce platforms to be able to reach a wider market. Other than that, if you look at what the government of Kenya has committed to do this year alone, is to migrate a lot of the services into a digital platform, so digitization of services. I think that's an area where the youth can actually take advantage of. There's going to be lots of opportunities for those, especially in the tech field, to develop applications that can actually help in terms of digitization. In the reform work that we do under the State Department for Investment Promotion, we also do a lot of mapping of systems. So we map systems to improve on efficiencies. And more often than not, we end up with a solution that's either based on technology or based on basically just look at how you can digitize or automate processes. So that's another area you can look at. I'll leave the one on education to my colleagues, but maybe I'll just pick on one last issue. Joseph, I think you raised an issue about end of life for e-waste, when you look at e-waste, when you look at motor vehicles. So the way you handle e-waste is governed by conventions. The conventions at international level, and within this country we have the National Environmental Management Authority that's mandated to basically enforce that compliance. It also creates an opportunity. I've been to many years back, I actually visited a company in the south of South Korea where the business was actually mining gold out of phones. And they made the money from that. So it's an opportunity that's there. If maybe we package it properly, we can actually attract additional investment and find a way of ensuring that perhaps there's a real circular economy built around that. Thank you.
I would add just on the issue of the youth and jobs in between Kenya and the EU, and maybe I'd mention 4 projects and 4 areas that we are working on in KEPSA, which would encourage a lot of the young people to join in. One, and I think from the investment side that has been mentioned, the e-commerce. We've actually been running, and we hope to move to phase 2, an e-commerce project with Trademark Africa, where a lot of the EU countries do support Trademark Africa, and through that support we've been able to run that. Our first phase, we were able to train and get about 2,000, almost 2,600 SMEs, and a lot of them are run by young people to their e-commerce platforms, and this is a place that they've been able to do a lot of business. The second one, we do have a project under KEPSA called the Sustainable Inclusive Business, and this is really a knowledge hub where we really work with businesses on sustainability, and we do encourage a lot of the young people to be that. Around that, we also run in that the Kenya Plastic Pact, which is the first in Africa, and this is really to get into the whole recycling, waste management, but under SIBs, where we are really hoping to hold a lot of the innovations that are coming out of the green economy and the circular economy, and so that would be a good area to get a lot of the young people. The third one is what we do, the digital and digitally enabled jobs, what we call Ajira. Ajira in Swahili, but means work. And again, because of what we're saying, you don't have to travel to do jobs across the continents as much as before. And so here we're training the young people to really work, get to have the digital skills and to be able to access the digital platforms so they can apply for jobs. And I think what I would encourage the business people who are here is that we can post a lot of the jobs online, so that a lot of the young people who are really, really skilled, especially the Kenyan youth, can do some of the jobs out there in Europe that without having to travel to Europe. That's one. There's another project that we've been working with the government of the French government, and again SIB, which is supported by the Dutch, and that's in the coast region, and this is on recycling, and we started with one of the slums, and this is recycling, but it's just not recycling, but it's getting the youth to earn and become entrepreneurs through that recycling, and we hope we can expand that. So those are some of the opportunities that would encourage the youth to be part of what we're doing, but there are many others if they get in touch with us.
Thank you very much. Do you want to add anything?
Thanks. Yes, a few comments on youth. And of course, I mean, it's a huge asset for Africa or your young population. And I think we can only look with envy, some of us, other countries, and the wonderful, like I said, energy you have in that. If I move over to the political level, and I mentioned the discussions we have between the EU institutions, our member states, and African leaders. What we normally try to have is also having a youth summit in conjunction to that, and have the chance of having youth views being actually presented to leaders. And I think that's very important also, because one of the things, of course, that we do very much in programs is to try to encourage SMEs, like was already mentioned. But I think it's also on the political level, it's very important to hear young voices. Because young people, and I can say that not being young, even though mentally perhaps we all feel young, the agility and the pickup of new technologies, that's really happening a lot more with the young population, as was said here before. So we have to take that advantage. We have to make sure that the opportunities are there, that the training is there. And then, of course, I come to the education. Yes, education is definitely still part of what we want to do together with Kenya. I mentioned earlier, it is very important because everything else we do requires skills. So it's not only formal education, but it's also skills training. And particularly in sectors like digital, you have a lot of use of young people who may need specific skills that you actually can train separately. And that is part of our offer, what we're trying to tie together when we look at investment possibilities together with African countries. Just one short comment on the end life. Of course, we're talking about international conventions, really important, but we're also talking about national policies. It's national policies very much also implementing these conventions that we've all signed up to that gives the impetus for changing behavior, but also changing behavior from the population, but also businesses. But as was said earlier, it actually creates business opportunities. And I think that is, again, we're going to the first mover advantage, looking at it on a regional level, and we see that in areas. Countries who's actually worked very closely at end life of products, but green waste, etc., they are actually doing fantastically well, because it's really at the build-up of demand already in the markets.
Thank you. I just wish to add something on what Oliech had said about importation of second-hand vehicles, the age limit put, and also the ones that are already in use within the country. The government has already come up with the automotive policy, which is in Parliament, and the aim of this policy is to reduce further the age limit of importation. The reason why we are addressing this is that we believe that the newer the vehicle, the better the technology, the more fuel efficient they are, and therefore less emissions. Then also we want to promote local assembly. Prior to liberalization and the flooding in of second-hand vehicles, Kenya used to assemble more than 10,000 vehicles. That's in the 90s. But currently, the number of units that are locally assembled are actually about 5,000. Yet the country has the capacity to assemble more than 30,000 units per year. We also want to encourage local assembly. Then, with regard to vehicles that are already within the country, I had indicated that we are attracting private investors to be involved in motor vehicle inspection. That is to ensure that the vehicles that are on the road are roadworthy. Currently, private cars are not being inspected because we don't have the capacity. But we believe the moment we have other players joining and playing a role in motor vehicle inspection, we should be able to address some of the issues that are with the fleet that is within the country. So that if the vehicle is well maintained, it meets the standard set, then however old it is, it will be kept on the road. But if it doesn't meet, then it has to be kept off the road. Currently, we are not removing them off the road. The moment we roll out private inspection, that will happen. Thank you.
Thank you. Dora, we're running out of time, so.
Yes, almost said, and then just one quick comment for me on the circular economy aspect. Elena was saying that indeed this is also a big business opportunity. On our side in Europe, we're putting lots of emphasis on that, and we estimate that by 2030 we should be able to actually source between a quarter and a third of our needs in critical materials from recycling and recycling up. So that is a very important point I wanted to make. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'd just like to thank my panelists for an amazing input and involvement they've had in this session. And thank you all, audiences, to be here. And yes, spot on at 12:30, this session is done. Thank you very much.
Okay, great. Let's give another proper round of applause for this amazing panel, for keeping time, ensuring we go for lunch right on time. So real quick, here's what we'll do. So I know it's a really big space and everybody's moving everywhere, so there might be a bit of confusion. So to avoid that, I'd encourage us to download the B2 March app. It has all the agendas. It helps you know where you need to be, and you don't get lost. B2 March, okay? That's one. Two, you might already have a lunch voucher with you.